Chapter 7 of the Boy Scouts in Front of Warsaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Felix Johnson. The Boy Scouts in Front of Warsaw, or In the Wake of War, by George Durston. Chapter 7. The Carved Panel. We will leave the Boy Scouts puzzling over the tremendous problem of getting in touch with headquarters and releasing Professor Morris and the others, while we visit a magnificent home far up in the residential part of the city, where the beautiful parks, wide streets, and fine buildings all told of great wealth. Many of the places lay in ruins, but here and there arose a dazzling white marble building that had happily escaped the destruction of the iron rain that had poured over the ill-fated city. Many of these were occupied by the officers and men of the invading army. Destruction of the worst sort went with them, and the unhappy owners had, whenever possible, secreted the most valuable of their belongings. Pictures, jewels, silver, furs, and even rugs were hidden in secret vaults or buried in gardens and cellars. For the people of Warsaw, as well as their fair city, were ruined, although sooner or later the scraps saved could be converted into money. Rich and poor fared alike. For the present, at least, everyone needed food and safe shelter. In the dining room of one of the finest places saved from the destroying shells sat a group of officers. They were big, blond men, and they talked roughly and rapidly in their native German. It was plain to see that they were quarreling. One of them, rising from the great carved chair in which he had been lounging, kicked it from his path and walked nervously up and down the room. He was scowling ferociously, while with his saber point he jabbed little holes in the Russian leather covering the back of the chair opposite him. He shook his head as the man who was walking up and down neared his chair. "I tell you, Otto, you can't do it," he said. "You can't bury things so. Those people are Americans. You can't execute that old man on a bare suspicion. What if his notes are a code? We have them, at all events, and we have him, and we must wait until the general returns." "That's not my idea at all," scowled the other man. "This is war. I am in command, my friend, and if I think I have a spy and see that it is my duty to stand this man against a wall, then what? Bang, bang, it is all over. What can be said?" "What is your idea exactly?" asked the man at the table. "What is the use of hurrying things so? It sounds like murder to me. I think the old man is perfectly harmless. He is probably just what he claims, a professor in one of the American universities. I've heard of this Princeton. It is a place of some size and standing." "That is just it, Gustav," cried the other. "That is one reason for suspecting him. He is too glib with his Princeton. Himmel, did you ever hear a man talk so fast and so much and use such words? I can speak as good English as any man my age, but there were words, dozens of them, that I had never dreamed of." "Is that the real reason why you were going to shoot him as a spy?" asked Gustav, coming back to the main point once more. "I don't suppose I shall shoot him at all," answered Otto grimly. "I want to, that's all. But I can't do it unless I have sufficient cause, no matter how I would like to remove him. He is in the way." Gustav stared and laid down his saber. "I see," he said, nodding his head slowly. "The girl?" "Yes, the girl," said Otto. He frowned and continued to walk up and down, while the other laughed. "What would you do?" he demanded. "You would get yourself into all sorts of trouble. There is no kidnapping of young women in this campaign, remember." "I would like to marry her," Otto said coolly. "She is so pretty and sweet." "So are the German girls," declared Gustav loyally. "What a romantic episode," sighed Otto, rolling his eyes in a sentimental manner. "I discover this beautiful American here in Warsaw, in the heart of the war. I love her. I marry her. It is wonderful." "It certainly is," said Gustav. "Wonderful indeed. And in order to bring her to a proper idea of your goodness and charm, you shoot her father and brother. Do you shoot her brother, by the way?" Otto scowled. "You are coarse, my friend. I do not shoot anyone. Germany merely discovers a spy. As for the brother, he is small. I think he disappears." "Does the German army cause that too?" asked Gustav. "Don't jest," said Otto. "I'm in earnest." "In truth, so am I," answered Gustav. "You are crazy, just plain crazy. The man is no more a spy than I am, I'll be bound." Otto shrugged his broad shoulders. "You don't know whereof you speak," he said. "You have not heard him talk, have you?" "No, I'll grant that," Gustav acknowledged. "Have him brought in, and let me hear him." "Very well," said Otto, "but speak English to him. His German is so bad that he ought to be shot for that, if for nothing else." He turned and summoned an orderly. The two men sat in silence. At a nearby table, 2 lieutenants were busy writing. They did not speak, but looked eagerly as the door opened and the prisoners entered. The lieutenants shifted in their chairs and smiled at each other in anticipation. Gustav caught their fleeting grins and dismissed them from the room with a curt command, then turned his attention to the group standing just within the door. Professor Morris stood with a protecting arm around each of his children. He looked broken and old, and wore the air of a man who has been rudely awakened from a secure and comfortable sleep to view some unimagined horror. The war, the bombardment, and the fall of Warsaw had at last become something more than a spectacle to be transferred to the pages of his book. It was a frightful fact, a living reality in which men died by thousands, and little children perished, where women's hearts broke with their anguish and despair. He found that war recognizes but few laws and even fewer obligations. It seemed that his standing as a man of learning, his claim as a citizen of the United States, availed him nothing. Standing there, a prisoner, with a helpless child on either side, the ivy-covered walls of his beloved Princeton seemed far away indeed. As he closed his tired eyes for an instant, he could see a clear and lovely picture of the velvet-green campus and the great iron gates opening on the smooth and level streets shaded by lofty trees. He heard the chimes, the laughter of happy young fellows passing to and fro. There were rows and rows of peaceful homes, stately mansions, and simple cottages. On level, perfectly kept tennis courts, here and there, men and girls, all in white, played tennis. He saw his friends, but opening his weary eyes, he saw a gorgeous, tumbled room whose princely draperies were torn and full of saber cuts, a sideboard where priceless glass had been a target for the rough play by rougher men. Before him were the 2 hard, blond German faces, and there he stood, a prisoner, with his 2 children clinging to him. Warren and Eleanor were gone, he knew not where. Captain Handel stood motionless, but Captain Schmidt rose civilly and bowed when he saw Evelyn. He could not help it. The girl was so noble, so lovely, and hid her fright so gallantly, that he was compelled to pay her the slight courtesy that he did. "Captain Handel tells me that this notebook is yours, Professor Morris," Gustav commenced in almost perfect English. "It is," said the professor. He eyed it hungrily and reached a hand out without thinking what he did. Gustav drew the book back. "It has a suspicious look," he said. "So many plans and measurements and specifications. Will you not explain?" The professor reddened. He shut his mouth stubbornly. "Those are private notes," he said. "I was sent over here to make what discoveries I could along certain lines." "What? Did I tell you, Gustav?" broke in Otto, turning to his brother officer and speaking in a low tone. "There is the whole thing. He was a spy sent to make discoveries along certain lines. He confesses that. He has succeeded in doing so. The book tells us that." Wait, begged Gustav. "Professor Morris, do you understand that you are here facing a most serious charge?" "It is a silly, trumped-up charge," declared the professor irritably. "Silly, trumped-up charge. I absolutely will not answer your questions. Wait until you hear from the American consul." "We won't hear from him," said Gustav gently. "You are in our hands, bearing suspicious documents, and you refuse to answer our questions. Do you realize the seriousness of this affair?" "Certainly not," declared the professor. "And let me tell you, my young friend, I shall write this thing up in the papers when I return to America. I shall make public your personal attitude in the matter. At the present, all I demand is release, and that manuscript on the table beside you. Also, my notebook." He bowed slightly and stood waiting, as though he fully expected the officers to do his bidding, as indeed he did. "Will you explain your notes?" asked Gustav quietly. Otto was nervously biting his small mustache, his eyes fixed on Evelyn's lovely face. "No, no!" cried the professor loudly. "1,000 times no! I refuse to share with you the results of my researches. What, and have you get all the credit of all my labor? Never!" He clenched his hands. "Father," began Evelyn pleadingly. "Be silent, Evelyn," commanded her father sternly. "I know what I am about. I refuse to say anything, whatever happens." "You had better think this over, Professor," said Gustav. "We will leave you here alone for half an hour. Talk it over with your children, and decide if you wish to give up your life for the sake of these notes. Explain them to us, and we promise you safe conduct out of the country. The girl and boy will have to remain as guarantee of your good faith. They will not be harmed. In case you will not do as we suggest," he tapped his saber and started to the door. Otto spoke abruptly. "The windows are barred," he said. "2 men guard the door. You cannot escape. Decide." He looked longingly at Evelyn and followed Gustav from the room. The heavy door shut silently behind them, but not before they had a glimpse of the two soldiers standing at attention in the hallway. While they stood looking at it, it opened, and Otto entered, closing it after him. "I may as well tell you," he said, "you will shoot as a spy if you do not explain your charts and figures and leave the country." Then, as though he could not conceal his triumph, he added, "In any case, you know your daughter remains here." "Remains here?" cried the professor. "How is that? What do you mean?" Otto shrugged his shoulders. "I like her," he said coolly. "I might marry her." "You are very lovely," he added, turning his bold, cold eyes on Evelyn. She hid her face against her father's shoulder. Otto laughed. Jack sprang at him with a shrill cry. The big man caught the boy and flung him contemptuously to the floor. "Be careful, little sparrow," he said. "A second time, and I will crush you." "I'm going now," he said, turning to the professor. "In half an hour we will come, and you will tell us which you prefer, death or safe conduct." He bowed. "Good-bye for a little, Miss Evelyn," he said, and closed the door behind him. Evelyn threw herself on her father's shoulder and burst into sobs. "Oh, father, father, what shall we do?" she cried. The professor was silent. Then he said, "Well, my dear, I actually believe that young man meant what he said." "Of course he did," sobbed Evelyn. "In that case," said the professor firmly, "I would as life be dead as to have the work of a lifetime destroyed by those rascals." He hastened to the table and took up the portfolio, enclosing his book. "It's all here," he said after a glance. "But, father, whatever they do to you, they are going to keep me here. What will I do? What will I do?" She ran to the windows and looked out. It was just as they had been told. The casements were heavily barred, and there was but one door, the one through which the officers had passed. The walls were paneled halfway up with old oak. The room was solid as a dungeon. There was not a chance for escape. In a few minutes the soldiers would return and tear her father from her. Her father was speaking. She listened. "All here," he said. "Every page. That is fortunate indeed." He looked searchingly at Evelyn. "I have a plan. My," he said, "this is a very dreadful affair. But on second thought, a scheme occurs to me. I will explain somewhat of my notes, but not enough so they could amplify them. Then, with my safe conduct, I will go over to Germany, explain the whole affair, and demand your release. You will doubtless be absolutely safe here, absolutely safe. This young Handel seems rather a rattle-brained youth, but Captain Schmidt looked conservative and sane. I will place you in his charge. Jack is with you, and you will be perfectly safe, I am positive." Evelyn grew deathly pale. She kissed her father's cheek, then listlessly approached the table. A revolver was lying there. "Yes, I know that I will be safe," she said firmly. She took the weapon in her hand and looked up. As she raised her eyes, she looked straight into the face of a girl about her own age, who stood motionless against the wall, one hand outstretched as though to call to her. Evelyn stared in unbelief. An instant before, they had been alone in the room. Were her senses leaving her? She looked at her father and brother. They, too, were staring, speechless and wild-eyed. So she did not imagine the graceful figure and lovely face with its dark troubled eyes. The stranger pressed a finger on her lips in a gesture of silence. Then she beckoned, and as they approached, tiptoeing over the thick rug, she turned and pressed a finger on a carved rosette in the oak panel. Without a sound it slid open, and they found themselves in a narrow stone passage. Once more the strange girl motioned for silence. Then she slid an iron grating across the secret door through which they had come, and turning, ran lightly down the passage. Without a moment's hesitation, Evelyn started after, her hand still clasping the revolver which she had taken from the table. The professor, clutching his recovered manuscript, followed, while Jack brought up the rear. As they turned a corner, a faint shout reached them. The officers had returned to the empty room. The way was long, with many sharp turns. It seemed to be a space between rooms. Once or twice, shouts and laughter were faintly heard, as they seemed to pass near a room full of soldiers. It was dark. The girl ahead felt in her pocket and brought out a tiny flashlight. They came finally to a steep flight of stairs. Now for the first time the girl spoke. In a cautious whisper she said, "Be careful," and holding the flash behind her for their guidance, went swiftly and lightly down with the manner of one who is familiar with every inch of the way. The stairs were wide and shallow. There were a great many of them, and they seemed to go down a long way. Evelyn wondered if the place was built on a hillside, making it a long way to the underground regions she suspected below or beyond. She afterwards found out that this was correct. A door barred with iron was at the foot of the stairs. Indeed, they ended right against it. The girl pushed the door open, and when they had entered, closed it behind them and dropped a massive bar across it. They were in a large stone chamber, empty, save for a few scraps of furniture. Their guide swiftly crossed the room and opened another forbidding-looking door. The second room was like the first, but filled with casks and huge barrels. Beyond this again they entered a narrow passage, so very narrow that their garments brushed the walls at either side. The stones underfoot were rough and uneven. Professor Morris walked carefully, picking his steps by the aid of the flashlight. Evelyn and Jack, more careless, stumbled frequently, but still the girl, light as a feather, flitted on, swift and sure-footed. Once more the flash revealed a wall ahead. As she approached it, the girl turned and smiled. Evelyn stared. There was no sign of any opening in the rough wall, and the great stones seemed fast in their cement, but the girl, stooping, pressed a corner of one of the paving stones. To their amazement, it slid from its place, revealing another very narrow flight of steps. The girl descended, and when they were all down, pressed another spring, and the stone slid in place. Another flight of steps, exactly like the ones they had just ascended, rose against the flooring, and when the girl had led the way, they one by one stepped into a large and brightly lighted room. Professor Morris blinked, Jack turned red, Evelyn gasped with surprise. End of Chapter 7. Recording by Felix Johnson.